President of the Security Council has just summed up for you the discussion we have had in consultation. And of course, it's his right to do so, but I want to point out that it was Ambassador Ro's personal summary of events. It was by no means something which was agreed by members of the Security Council. Now, as you know, the Russian Federation has looked very carefully at a reported use of chemical weapons in Syria and at the work of Mr. Sallström and his team. And we shared, in consultation with our colleagues, the results of our both technical and political analysis of various circumstances surrounding this. So let me share with you what we have concluded. The information contained in the two reports submitted by the Sallström mission to the Security Council of September 16 and December 12, 2013, confirms that chemical weapons were used in several cases during the Syrian conflict. Most alarming are the two major cases of sarin use near Aleppo on March 19 and in Ghouta on March 21. Who is responsible for this is a question of utmost importance. There are two possible versions. The chemical weapons were used either by the Syrian government or by the opposition. If we are to assume that they were used by the government, then the story is full of contradictions. If the government forces used sarin on March 19 near Aleppo, how come the Syrian military personnel and the civilians in close proximity to them were hit? Why did the Syrian government immediately request an international investigation of that incident? Why did those who accused the Syrian government of this act did their utmost to derail or at least delay such investigation? Let me remind you that first, the UN Secretary General positively responded to the request by the Syrian government to conduct an immediate investigation. But then the United Kingdom and France all of a sudden recalled a Holmes case that had not bothered them for 3 preceding months, while the United States started insisting on the need to investigate all incidents. As a result, the UN Secretariat, unfortunately, yielded to this pressure and proposed to the Syrian government a document with terms of reference for investigation that mandated creation of a permanent UN inspection mission in Syria. Such mission would have lasted as long as its head would have liked and would have had full access to the entire territory of the country. In brief, we saw the replication of the same old story as the search for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. However, the difference was that Baghdad, unlike Damascus, was under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. No surprise that the Syrian government did not accept these conditions. Then the Syrian government asked Russia to conduct an investigation by Russian experts. They arrived on the spot, gathered samples, and examined them in Russia in an OPCW-certified laboratory. A comprehensive report was prepared and submitted to the UN Secretary General and our P5 Security Council colleagues. Mr. Sallström got acquainted with this report and even traveled to Moscow to discuss it with Russian experts. In his report of December 12, Mr. Sallström does not refute our conclusions, which are the following. On March 19, homemade sarin was used near Aleppo. The projectile that was used for sarin delivery was also a cottage industry product. We even named an opposition group that could have committed this act. Only later, the UN Secretariat and the Syrian government resumed negotiations and managed to reach an agreement on the modalities of the mission of experts. And the Syrian government agreed, along with the Aleppo incident, UN experts could study a certain number of other incidents of their choosing. So the Syrian government put no prohibitive restrictions. But the tragic events in Ghouta on August 21 interfered. It is deeply regrettable that the Aleppo incident in March was not investigated in a timely manner. If it had been, the Ghouta tragedy may have been prevented. The United States, followed by some other states, blamed the Syrian government for the use of chemical weapons in Ghouta. To substantiate this accusation, the United States released a 4-page document containing only hints and assertions but no real evidence. A classified version of this document was sent to the US Congress. Some legislators later complained to the media that they could not understand anything from that report. Our requests for additional information which could prove the Syrian government involvement in the use of chemical weapons were ignored by Washington. The lack of any proof was particularly strange since, as the public learned from the media reports based on Edward Snowden's materials, the United States had powerful intelligence assets in Syria, sensors capable to provide in real-time information on any mixing of precursors by the Syrian troops for sarin production. Sarin does not live long. It has to be produced a few days before its intended use. That kind of information was obtained by the United States in December 2012, when the Syrians mixed chemical agents during a drill. Having received such information, President Obama publicly warned the Syrian government against chemical weapons use, duplicating this warning through diplomatic channels as well. On September 10, in his statement blaming Assad's government for using chemical weapons in Ghouta, President Obama said that the United States knew that the Syrians, for a few days in advance of August 21, were preparing for a chemical attack. A legitimate question suggested itself. It was asked both by us and by the Syrian opposition. If they knew, why did they fail to act like they did in December 2012? No intelligible answer was received. You will find the mystery resolved in an article by the American journalist Seymour Hersh, which was published on December 9. He explains that the US administration simply extrapolated to the situation of August 21 their understanding of how the Syrian military were supposed to act in preparation for the use of chemical weapons. Indeed, one needs to read carefully President Obama's statement on September 10. He says, and I quote, "In the days leading up to August 21, we know that Assad's chemical weapons personnel prepared for an attack near an area where they mix sarin gas," end of quote. That is, we know as of September 10, not in the days that preceded August 21. Also, there is no allegation that the chemical agents were actually being mixed to produce sarin. It is about some abstract preparations. So in the days before August 21, the United States had no information at all. It is clear why. The censors stayed silent because no chemical agents were mixed to produce sarin. But if sarin was not being produced, then the Syrian government troops did not have it for use on August 21. This conclusion is also supported by the fact that on August 21 and 23, American officials stated repeatedly that the US government kept investigating the situation. But one can ask, isn't there physical evidence that chemical weapons on August 21 were used by the Syrian government? For example, an artillery projectile that indicatively matches what the Syrians have in their inventory. However, Professor Postel of Technology and National Security at MIT, having studied the issue, came to the conclusion that this projectile was an improvised one and could be manufactured in a machine shop, while the range of the rocket could not exceed 2 kilometers. It means that it was launched from the territory controlled by opposition. Besides, as our experts concluded, sarin used on August 21 was of approximately the same type as the one used on March 19, though of a slightly better quality. It means that over a few months, opposition chemists somewhat improved the quality of their product. But all that would mean that the chemical attack on August 21 was carried out by the opposition. Still, the US Permanent Representative to the United Nations stated on September 16, and I quote, "It's very important to note that we have no evidence that the opposition possesses sarin," end of quote. This statement was, to say the least, an attempt to mislead the public opinion. As Seymour Hersh shows in the above-mentioned article, for several months before the events in August, the American intelligence services repeatedly reported to their superiors evidence that the opposition had learned how to produce sarin and was capable of manufacturing it in quantity. In late August, there were media reports that the US administration had been refusing to supply chemical protection gear to the opposition. Why? Did the US want to maximize the losses of the opposition in case of chemical attack from the government forces? That explanation would be too cynical. It is more logical to assume that the US administration feared that the opposition groups would resort to the use of chemical weapons once they got the protective gear. It is not accidental, after all, that in the UN Security Council Resolution 2118 on the chemical weapons destruction in Syria, a number of provisions were included with the active cooperation of the US delegation that aimed at making sure that non-state actors do not produce or use chemical weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. Why would the Syrian government use chemical weapons on August 21? to cross the red line drawn by Washington and invite missile strike upon itself. Why would the opposition use chemical weapons? Exactly because of the red line, to provoke foreign military intervention in the Syrian conflict. It is absolutely obvious that on August 21, a large-scale provocation was staged. That is exactly the explanation for a number of incongruities that analysts point to. Why and how were the dead bodies of children so quickly brought together in one place? Where are the parents? Why were there no women among the medical personnel, while women are usually numerous at Syrian hospitals? Why does the medical staff wear no protective mask? And so on and so forth. All these events resemble what we have already seen in history. World War II began with a provocation triggered the American war in Vietnam, and NATO's bombardment in Serbia started with a provocation. Sophisticated filtration of information and manipulation of public opinion preceded the invasion in Iraq. Luckily, this time we managed to avoid an international escalation of the Syrian conflict. So this was the narrative which I gave to my colleagues in the Security Council, please.
Mr. Ambassador, I wonder why this incident of catching some 10 or more Al-Qaeda members or Nusra members in Turkey carrying 2 kilograms of sarin, bringing them in a passenger airliner from Libya. Why has this been ignored all through? What did Mr. Sellström say about that? If he was collecting evidence and from you or from others, why didn't he seek evidence from the Turkish authorities?
You know, that was a suspicious incident to us. That was to us an indication that, another indication that the opposition, especially the extreme groups, may be toying with chemical weapons, and we were not entirely satisfied by the way this issue went away. We think that we should have had a more convincing explanation, for example, from the Turkish authorities, of what have happened. As to Mr. Sellström, I personally believe that it was not really in his mandate, but you need to ask this question of Mr. Sellström.
To what extent...
I'm sorry?
This is the first time UN inspectors have reported that government soldiers are victims of a gas attack.
Yeah.
That explains what happened on
No, this is, I think, another argument, because in Aleppo on March 19, those were government soldiers and civilians surrounding them. In a few relatively minor incidents which are reported by Mr. Sellström on December 12, also it's the Syrian government soldiers who are affected. So to us, it's one of the evidences that, in fact, it was not the Syrian government that was using chemical weapons.
Yeah, to what extent did you try to draw out Dr. Sellström specifically to respond to the findings in the analysis by Russia, and what were his responses?
Well, Dr. Sellström, I think, did what he could. And what we're saying is by no means a criticism of Dr. Sellström. But this is something which we also briefly discussed with colleagues in consultation of the Security Council. Our experts, having looked at it very closely, have a number of questions. For example, well, there are some like projectiles lying on the ground, but it's not obvious how long they'd been there before they were found by Mr. Sellström. Or there is a certain projectile referred to as a possible kind of a projectile which was used for the delivery of chemical weapons. But our experts look at it and said that it could not have been that, like the fuse from that projectile was separated during flight, which actually happened. So, and that's, you know, looking into the trajectories is something which raises some questions in the minds of our experts. So, the sum total of the report of Mr. Sellström, I think, does not give enough ground to definitively prove something. But we did our best in summing something up. We tried to be objective. In fact, some colleagues tried to accuse me in the Council that we trusted the Syrian government. That was not the case. We did not trust anybody. Others trusted the U.S. government when it declared that those were the Syrian government soldiers who used chemical weapons. There was no trust in our position, just the analysis of the situation.
In the section on Kanal also, it talks about this video that I think has been discussed here at the stakeout of Anastasia Popova, the Russian journalist. Do you think the disarmament people told me very kind of dismissively that this wasn't useful evidence? Do you feel that Sellström looked at it? Have you seen it? What do you think it proves?
I don't want to go into technical details of discussions. There were all sorts of videos. In our view, some of the arguments, technical arguments, video arguments, which were used by others to prove the Syrian government did it, were not persuasive. One other thing we heard today from my American colleague, Ambassador Powell, referred to some recording. What's the English? Interception, some communication. Communication was the word of some Syrian official who allegedly was worried about the use of chemical weapons on August 21, and was worried that the Syrian mission will come and investigate. And of course, I asked a number of questions. Well, first of all, of course, was there this interception and when it was done in the first place? But then we heard all sorts of interceptions. Secretary Power, you remember, in this big chamber, played an interception of conversation of two men, and it was obvious to me when I was listening that they were trying to hide weapons of mass destruction. In the end, what they were talking about remains to be a big mystery. But and maybe some Syrian official was worrying that it was the Syrian government forces which used chemical weapons. But the most important thing is that the Syrian government did allow the Söderström inspection to come in within days of the Ghouta incident. The Syrian government is, I'm saying that because we're following it very carefully, and we're telling the Syrian government that they should be as cooperative as they can. And I think we can be satisfied that despite some hitches which happened down the road, and I described how they happened, they responded satisfactorily. In fact, somebody asked Mr. Söderström if he was satisfied with the cooperation of the Syrian government in the course of his investigation. I don't want to sort of, but I think he said that, of course, it's a relative term, but generally his answer was yes. In the course of this investigation, they got the.
One, I don't understand exactly what you're suggesting. Are you suggesting that President Obama is itching for a war in Syria?
No,
all evidence shows
this is not. No, this is not my suggestion at all.
Wait, and the second question.
No.
Okay.
I think this chapter is closed, and if you read Seymour Hersh's article, he gives some theories about the behavior of President Obama. I don't want to go there because it's not my job to have any theories. But now that we have this program of chemical weapons destruction, where we are cooperating very well with the United States and others, and we hope we are successful in concluding it in a timely manner.
Second question about Geneva II. Where does it stand now as far as Russia is concerned? Is it going to happen? And
yeah, as far as we are concerned, the preparation is proceeding, and we hope on January 22 it's going to happen. Yeah.
Mr. Ambassador, the humanitarian situation is worsening. He hopes for a ceasefire. What is your position on those two things? Ceasefire before the political talks in January, and a Security Council resolution on humanitarian access?
Well, we are working very hard on the humanitarian situation, and the high-level group has been created. We are talking with the Syrian government. I think that there have been some changes in procedures which simplify the work somewhat of the humanitarian agencies, even though their work, of course, is dramatically difficult there, unless there is a political settlement. I personally do not believe that there can be a radical improvement on the humanitarian situation, but we must ensure that the humanitarian rules, are being respected by all the parties in Syria.
Security Council resolution.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador. Again, on Dr. Söderström investigation, on Friday he told us that what he found, if he had to go to court, he will not stand, it will not be the smoking gun to find who did it. Now, we all here asking always why the UN doesn't investigate, not only to find out if they were used, we know that the chemical weapon were used, but why we don't go now to the step to find out who did it. So now I ask you what Russia intend to do to change the mandate of the doctors.
I think, well, first of all, we are all united in the unacceptability of impunity. We all believe that the use of chemical weapons is a very serious crime, and we made it clear in Resolution 2118. How this problem of no impunity can be dealt with in this situation, I have no answer at this point. Thank you very much.